Hi everyone, Krista Cowan here with another episode of The Barefoot Genealogist. Today we are talking about best practices for attaching records to your online tree. Now, Ancestry currently has more than 16 billion records available online. About 10% of our most popular databases are searched automatically for you to provide those little shaky leaf hints that you get as you build your tree. The rest of the databases have to be searched manually. You can do it automatically from your tree by clicking search from any person in your tree. That will pre-populate the search form with the information you know about that person. Now, the intent of that search is really just to do a high-level, quick grab, see if there's anything that hints missed kind of a search. Then you have to start doing more database-specific, more focused searches in order to find the records that you're looking for. Now, whether you find your records through hints, through a tree search, or through a focused search, you still need to be able to attach those records to your tree. And so I'm just going to walk you through some best practices that will help you attach records more easily. It'll ensure that you're attaching the right records to the right people, because that will affect your hint process. It will also affect the suggested records process for anybody else researching those same individuals. So we want to make sure we always attach records accurately. And then I'm just going to share with you some things that I do during the attach process to make sure that the data in my tree is as clean and as accurate and as standardized as possible. There are genealogical standards for entering dates and places and names, and so we want to make sure that we enter all of that information accurately. And these 16 billion records on Ancestry come from all different places. Sometimes we create the index based on images that we have received from an archive. Sometimes an archive or repository will sell us an index that they've already created, and there's some limitations with what we can do with that. So lots of different ways in which Ancestry obtains records. And what that means is that sometimes the data that we're importing into our tree isn't standardized. So it's up to us to make sure that we standardize those dates and those locations and those names based on the genealogical standards. The beautiful thing is that once we do that, lots of different automated tools in Life Story, in Facts, in search, in hints, lots of those automated processes can then work a lot more smoothly for us. Really big intro today, but just wanted to make sure you understand why we're talking about this topic. Let's go ahead and dive in and actually look at attaching some of those records. So I've created a tree here for this gentleman named Robert Fidium. And he's got a wife and he's got some children, and the research that I'm doing is for the descendants of this child, Robert Jr. And so you can see I've already got some records attached here. On New Ancestry, under the Facts tab, those sources have been moved right front and center. And that was a very intentional thing. We wanted to make sure that everybody who uses Ancestry, seasoned genealogists like myself, brand new people just coming to the site for the first time today, that everybody understands the significance and the importance of sources. Being able to say where we got information in our tree is really important. And so one of the things we do once you attach a record is you can click on it and it actually will tell you which facts in your tree are supported by that specific source citation or that document. And I can do that with any source. I can also click any fact and it will show me which multiple sources sometimes support that specific fact. So that's how the sources are functioning in New Ancestry and one of the reasons why they are front and center. Now let's look at actually attaching some records. So I have a 1900 census here, a 1910 census. It does look like I have some additional hints here for Robert that I'm going to want to explore. I do know some things about him and his family. I've got a wife's name and some names of some children. I have an approximate marriage date and place based on the 1900 census. I've got some residence locations. So let's see what else these hints are going to tell me about Robert. So I click on hints. You'll see here the top hint, of course, is to other family trees. It looks like he does show up in a few of those. I always look at record hints first. I want to come to my own conclusions before I go looking at other people's assumptions about an individual in my tree. And so I'm going to look down here at these records. And it looks like we've got some records prior to his marriage. We've got some records after his marriage. I also always look at the records that are more closely connected with what I know about an individual. So for example, I could go look at this 1870 or this 1880 census, but I don't know who his parents are. And so how do I know that that record I'm getting the hint for is actually for him if I don't know more about him? So I'm going to keep looking at records based on what I do know about him and hope that it gives me additional clues or additional information so that once I dive into the unknown, I have more certainty that I'm actually looking at the right person. So I'm going to look at this 1930 census next. Now, one of the things you're going to notice, and I'll make my screen a little bigger so that you can see it here, I have this little mini tree up here. That is only going to show up when you are viewing records through hints or through a tree search. If you're viewing records doing a focused search, this information doesn't show up. So one of the things that I do, just to keep myself straight and make sure I understand everything correctly in my head, is I keep a tree view or a profile view open in another tab while I am doing research so that I can refer to it. Now, if you have multiple screens or multiple monitors, this is a little bit easier, but it is still possible even if you're working with a single screen. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to right-click on any link, and you can do this with any link, and I'll talk about it quite a bit actually today, and I'm going to open that link in a new tab. And what that does is it takes this information about Robert and it just puts it here in a new tab so that I can review the hint and toggle back and forth between these two tabs if I need to do that. So that I want to make sure that I'm looking at the records for the right person. These are just hints, and the computer is basing it on what it knows or what I have entered about this individual. And it could be that there's somebody else with the same name in the same time in the same place. That has happened, even with names that you think might be a little bit more unique. So I try to always keep some kind of a tree view, whether it's this or this little tree snippet up here, in front of my face as I'm reviewing records so that I know that I've got the right person. Now, this is called the record page or the index page. And you'll notice there's actually quite a bit of information here, but how do I know if this information is accurate? Okay, that's a big question. So, where possible, Ancestry always provides the original image. Now, we're not always able to do that. Sometimes the record repository doesn't give us the original images for whatever reason. Sometimes they will only provide us with the index. But if an original image exists, always view it for a couple of reasons. One is because you want to make sure that the information in the index is accurate. Sometimes things get mistyped, mistranscribed, misunderstood, and so you want to make sure that you've got the most accurate information possible. The other reason is that the purpose of an index is to get you to the original image. So very rarely does it contain a complete transcription of every single thing that's on the record. And so I want to always view the original record because I want to make sure that I've extracted all of the juicy goodness from that record. Every clue, every hint, every detail that will provide me not just with clues for further research, but also with a more complete view of the story of the life of this particular individual. Now, those of you who spent some time with me know that I undertake the practice of actually transcribing every record that I find into the notes for every person. And so as I find records, I transcribe the records into complete sentences so that I know, so that I have like a little story about this particular record that I've created, and I do that in the notes feature. It's not what we're talking about today, so let me just point out here one other reason to look at the original image, particularly in the case of census records or tax rolls or passenger lists, anything where you've got multiple people listed on a record, is because very often you're going to find family members living near this individual or this family. And so I always want to check at least this image and maybe the previous image or two and the subsequent image or two to make sure I've caught everyone in the family, to make sure nobody's missed to make sure that I understand how they're living in context or in relation to each other. Now, I can attach the record directly from this image. That is totally acceptable. We give you the option up here, yes, no, maybe, when it's a hint. There's a giant green save button up here when you've done it as a direct search. Couple of things you want to be careful of if you're going to do that. Double check the name up here in the top center. Make sure that the focus person is still the person that you're working with, because when you click that yes button, it's going to ask you, it's going to try and match the record you were just looking at with the person that you came from in your tree. And sometimes when we click around or are investigating things, this information doesn't match up. So I find that it's usually easier to attach a record from the record page, the index page. Now, if I scroll down here, I've got Robert and Louise. I'm going to go ahead and click yes, because this is the person in my tree. And there's a couple of things we're going to notice as we go through this process. So, first of all, I have an incorrectly formatted date here. It was spelled wrong. I spelled May wrong. I did that because I was fat fingering and in a hurry. So I can actually correct information directly from here. Okay. Now you'll notice these two boxes over here on the left are not checked. It's because if I check them, it's going to add an alternate date or an alternate piece of information. And I don't want to do that. This person was only born once. Now that reported birth year or birth date or age may be different on a lot of records, but I want to collect all of the source citations, all of the sources, all of the records that give me information about his birth, and I want to attach it to just one fact. I want to make sure that I then can resolve all that conflicting evidence. That's part of the genealogical proof standard. But I'm only going to have one birth fact. I'm only going to have one fact per marriage. I'm only going to have one death fact. I might have lots of residence facts because those are based on different dates. They are actually different events. But there's really only one birth event. And so for me, part of standardization is making sure that I've got the right boxes over here checked and unchecked so that I'm not adding a ton of alternate information into my tree with a single source citation for each alternate, but that I have one fact with all the source citations that I have used to come to a particular conclusion about this individual's birth. Okay, so pay attention to the check boxes over here. Next, I'm going to scroll down, and you can see here we've got this little grayed out thing over here on the right. The left is what is in the record. The right is what is in my tree. And so I can, if I click the checkbox up here, it's going to now highlight what's in my tree, and it's going to copy the information over, the source citation over for his wife as well. Okay? So I'm going to go ahead and click save, and that's going to attach that information to my tree. It tells me over here the record's saved. You want to wait for that little pop-up box to make sure it worked. You can actually check over here on the facts page, and now you'll see that 1930 census attached to both Robert. If I click through to Louisa, it's attached to Louisa as well. Okay, now let me just pause for a minute here. Let's come back over here to this slide deck, and let me just make sure we've captured all the information that we want to capture to this point. I mentioned that we always want to review the original record where possible. You're going to want to make note of discrepancies on the original image versus the index, because you don't want to be allowing the attach process to attach inaccurate information to your tree. And by that I mean dates that are wrong, or names that are spelled wrong, or locations that were misinterpreted. You can, as you attach that information, correct or add the correct information during that process. You also want to make sure that you capture additional information, because the index is not a complete transcription of the record. It is only a finding aid to the record. And so the only thing getting added, or the only information being sourced in your tree, is what's included in the index. So if you need to create additional facts or add additional information, you want to make sure you've got a note of that so that you can do that. You also want to pay attention to what information is being attached in that attach process. Make sure you're attaching the records to the right person, not to a child or a parent or a spouse, but that you've got the focus person on the record and you're attaching it to that person in your tree. As I mentioned, you also want to really carefully review alternate information and make a determination how you're going to handle that information in a consistent way in your tree. As I mentioned, I will add alternate residence locations because they can have multiple residences over a period of time, over their lifetime. But I only allow the system to create one birth date, one date per marriage, and one death date per person so that I don't have a bunch of alternate information in my tree. The point of the genealogical proof standard is to make sure that we do that reasonably exhaustive search, collect all the source citations that we can, resolve that conflicting evidence, and then come to a particular conclusion, and that's what we enter into our tree. Now, that conclusion may change over time. As we collect new information, we may make adjustments or change the information that we have concluded previously. But one instance of those facts per person is going to help you keep your tree clean, it's going to help you keep your sanity, and it's going to make sure that all those source citations are attached correctly. Okay, next up, let's talk about why some records attach differently than others. And I will use the US as an example, but this is true in Canada, it's true in the UK. It's true anytime that there are multiple people listed on a record. Some records will attach to multiple family members and some records do not. In the US, one of the ways that we determine that for the federal census is based on what relationships are listed on the record itself. So starting in 1880, the U.S. federal census started listing the relationship of everybody in the household to the head of household. And so because of that, the automated systems here, as you go through the attach process, can actually look at a record and say, well, that's his spouse, and those are his children, and that's his mother-in-law. Okay? And so it can pick out who in your tree these records need to be attached to. Prior to 1880, the U.S. federal census did not list the relationships to the head of household. And you even can't assume, so certainly our computers can't assume, that everybody in that household with, even if it's 2 adults and a bunch of children, are a nuclear family. I always have a hard time with that word. And so you want to make sure that the people that you're attaching the record to, you want to make sure you understand their relationships before you just make those assumptions. But our computers are not going to make those assumptions for you. And so we put you in a position where you have to attach those records pre-1880 to each person in the family individually. Now, with that said, there are some fast and easy ways to do this. So let me walk you through an 1880 census and then also an 1870 census so that you can see a couple of different scenarios. So here is an 1880 census record for Robert. Now remember, Robert is the head of our family here. However, in the 1880 census, he is a child living in the household of his parents. Now the question might be, how do you know this is the household of his parents? Well, I actually have found, I just haven't attached it yet, so let's do that, a death certificate for him that lists the names of his parents. So here's his death certificate. I make sure I viewed the original image. I've got this information here about a birth date and place, a death date and place, father's name and birthplace, mother's name and birthplace. So I'm going to walk through and make sure I attach this record. Again, here is where I can update the information from this specific record. And somebody may ask, well, why didn't you just copy over the information from the record? Well, it's because this is not a standardized place. You'll notice there's no county, there's no country. And so by typing it in, I actually can select from the pre-formatted, accurately formatted location dictionary to make sure I get that in there correctly. Okay, this one is formatted correctly, city, county, state, country, and I'm going to go ahead and save that to my tree. Now, on the record itself, I had the names of Robert's parents. Okay, Samuel Fidium, and I believe it was Sarah Oldham. This particular record, the way that the index was created, the way that Ancestry received those records, didn't give me an option to attach parents. So I could manually go in and add them, or, and this brings us back to this 1880 census, I can do it from here. Okay, so I'm on 13-year-old Robert. That's the focus person. That's who I am looking at in my tree. And yes, this record matches him. So I'm going to go ahead and click yes. And you'll notice here we can attach this to Robert now. Now it's going to ask me if I want to add his parents. You'll notice there's nothing grayed out over here on the right-hand side. Well, that's because I don't already have this individual in my tree. So I'm going to go ahead and add a father. I'm going to add a mother. Now you'll notice here it actually puts her married name in there because that's what's on the record. But we all know that we enter women into our trees with their maiden names. And if you don't know their maiden name, you don't want to add their married name. That just causes a ton of confusion for yourself and others. If you don't know their maiden name, you want to leave it blank. Or I like to put in 5 underscores because that gives me a blank line so that I know I'm still looking for that piece of information. It's just a visual cue for me. Now we actually have some evidence of her maiden name, if you remember from that death certificate. So I'm going to go ahead and add that. And now I can just go through and add the siblings of Robert from that same record. And I can just quickly click through this and it will add those siblings for me. Don't want to skip Elizabeth. Okay, we're going to add her, and we're going to add William, and we're going to make sure we got, this is a very large family. Add a couple more kids here, Mary and Samuel. And how great that I don't have to manually go in and type all this information in. Now with that said, when things are too automated, sometimes we become a little bit lazy. I'm guilty of that myself. And so just make sure that you pay attention to what it's adding to your tree. Actually look at the record, look at the information it's adding. I find that when I manually enter information, I'm more likely to remember it, but sometimes it's nice to just have the system do it for me automatically. Okay, so now we have this whole family here, Sarah and Samuel, and their 8 children, including our Robert, and all those people except Robert were added automatically based on the fact that this 1880 census lists those relationships. Now, let's look at the 1870 census, okay? Remember I said prior to 1880, no relationships are listed on the federal census, okay? And so you want to, again, review the original record, look at the family, make sure you understand what's happening here in this family, and maybe even, if I refresh this, maybe even compare what's on the census with what you already know about this particular family. So Samuel and Sarah, and in 1870 they should have Joseph and John and Robert and Hannah living in the household. And so if we come back over here, we see Samuel and Sarah with Joseph and John and Robert and Hannah living in the household. Now, if I click yes that I want to attach this record, you're going to notice that it only allows me to attach it to one person. Now I can do that and click save, and it's going to attach the record to Samuel, but then what about the rest of the family? Okay, I could then double click on the source, go back to view the record, and go through this one person at a time in that fashion, but for me that seems a little bit tedious. So here's where our right click and open a new tab function is going to come in handy. It's also a really great way to create kind of a forced checklist to make sure that you catch everyone in the family. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on Sarah with a right click, open a new tab. And I'm going to do the same thing with Joseph and with John and with Robert and with Hannah. Now there are 2 members of the household here. From the original image, we learned that they are actually laborers that are living with the family. And I have not been able to find any evidence that they are family members, extended family members, though they sometimes are. So you always want to look into that. But these 2 men, as far as I can tell, are not related to the family. So I'm not going to worry about them at this time. Now I'm going to close this tab for Samuel, and you'll notice now here I'm in a record page for Sarah. But there's no little tree at top, and there's no little yes, no, maybe buttons down here. Now all we have is a save button. And that's because I've gone away from the focus person in my tree, and so the system doesn't know who to save it to. So I just have to tell it. So I come in here and I click save, and it's going to pop up a little search box, and I'm going to type in Sarah, and her name is going to come up, and I'm going to click on that, and then I'm going to attach. And that's going to allow me to go through that exact same attach process again for her. And then I'm done with that, so I can close that tab. And now I'm here on Joseph, and so I can save this to Joseph in my tree, and click attach, and make any edits I need to, and click save, and then close that tab. And you'll notice that one of the benefits of doing it this way is that it is a lot faster than having to go back and forth to the original record and make sure you click on the right person. So I just love this right-click, open a new tab feature, and then as I attach the record to each individual person, I can close it, and then I know that I've caught everyone in the family, that I've made sure that everyone is accounted for. Okay, back to our slide deck here. Let's just make sure we've captured everything. You do want to edit information during that attach process. You can edit information later, but it's a lot easier to just edit it right there during the attach process because it lends to more accuracy, it lends to more ease. It allows you to correct some of those indexing errors. It allows you to standardize those dates and places. Okay, one final thing that I want to talk to you about as we go through this process, every once in a while, you come across somebody in a particular record who you do not already have in your tree, or who you have in your tree, but you haven't, but the system doesn't recognize them. And so when you're going through the attach process, let's come over here to, let's see. Let's find another census record. Let's see if we've got a census record for Louisa with her parents. I think we do. Oh, here we go. Her father is Thomas and her mother is Hannah. So we click on this and we've got a Louisa with parents Thomas, and it says Nina in the index record, but if I click over here and look at the image, we'll see that it's actually Hannah. Okay, so here is this record for Louisa, and I'm going to click yes to attach. And I just want to point out one more link. Okay, when you're viewing a record for attach, sometimes you'll notice over here on the right-hand side that it can't find somebody in your tree. One of the ways that duplicate people are created in trees more often than any other is because the information we have entered into our tree does not match the information on the record in such a way that the computer can automatically recognize it. And so it thinks it's a new person. And so we click add and we end up creating a duplicate. If you're not sure, or if you just need to review the family, there is this not a new person link. And you can click that and it will actually pop up a list of the immediate family members of that person so that you can make sure that you don't already have them in your tree. Or if you do, you can force it to say, no, this person in the record matches this person I already have in my tree. So pay attention to that not a new person link. It's going to come up here. Also, there are times where the computer matches information up and it's not accurate. I should have pulled up a better example, but I have one example I was working with just last night where there were two brothers, one named Jonathan and one named Joseph, who were actually born about 13 months apart in the same place. And so the computer was looking at a census record, and on the census, the names or the ages of the two boys were swapped. And so the computer thought one was one and one was the other, and it was actually the other way around. And so it was trying to match up Jonathan with Joseph and Joseph with Jonathan. So all I had to do then was click this not a new person link up here, or to switch this person, and then it brings up that family list again, and I can force it to select a different person. So you always want to make sure you're attaching the right record to the right person, and we give you these little links along the way to make sure that you're doing that accurately. Okay? And again, remember, you can change any information that it's trying to add to your tree over here on the right-hand side, so that you make sure it adds the accurate information that you know about this person, or you can edit information as new information comes to light to make sure that your tree conclusions match the sum of the evidence that you've collected along the way as you have done your genealogical research. So that is just a few of the quick tips that I have to make sure that you're attaching records accurately, to make sure that you're doing your research well, and most importantly, to make sure that you're climbing your family tree and not someone else's. One of the challenges of easy attach, like I said, is that we get lazy, or sometimes we disengage our brains, and we want to make sure that we use those easy attach features to make our life easier, but that we're still doing accurate research so that we know that the people we're putting into our tree are our people. That's all I have for you today. Until next time, this is Krista Cowan. Have fun climbing your family tree.